It's 2:35 p.m. The weather is rainy and expected to worsen in the coming hours. This plane arrived 30 minutes ago from Mexico City with 94 passengers, all of whom have disembarked, and the crew change has been completed. At 2:56 p.m., in just 20 minutes, Aeromexico Connect Flight 2431 is scheduled to depart for Mexico City. Meanwhile, pre-flight checks are being conducted as the 98 passengers who will travel on the aircraft are being accommodated. The aircraft is an Embraer 190 with registration XAGAL, 10 years old, which previously flew for US Airways and Midwest Airlines before arriving at the Mexican Airline in 2014. The Embraer E-Jet series consists of narrow-body commercial jetliners manufactured in Brazil by Embraer. The series includes 2 main commercial families and an executive jet family. The E170 and E175 are based on the original design, while the E190 and E195 are stretched versions with different engines, larger wings, and landing gear. The pilot in command of Flight 2431 is Captain Carlos Galvan Meran, 38 years old, who has been working for Aeromexico Connect for 8 years and has 3,700 flight hours, 1,064 of which are in this type of aircraft. With him is First Officer Daniel Dardan Chavez, 25 years old, with 1,973 hours of experience, 460 of them in the Embraer 190. Also in the cockpit is an observer pilot who will be traveling as he is not licensed to fly this type of aircraft. In fact, he has only received initial instruction and has not even worked on simulators. His licenses are for flying small aircraft like the Beechcraft King Air or Super King Air. The crew is completed by 2 flight attendants, making a total of 103 people on board the Embraer with the 98 passengers. The previous crew reported a small fuel leak, and the first officer is checking the exterior of the aircraft to verify it. While the captain explains some things to the observer pilot, who is currently seated in the first officer's seat. The observer pilot cannot be assigned any tasks as he is not trained to fly this type of aircraft. However, while the first officer is outside, he starts performing some of his functions.
Good afternoon. We have ATIS out of service and are ready to copy.
The controller informs him of their assigned runway and the current wind conditions. The observer pilot then passes this information to the captain.
Thank you. Why don't you program the FMS? Without errors, please.
The observer pilot begins entering all necessary data into the computer. At that moment, the first officer enters the cockpit, indicating that the leak has been repaired and they are ready to depart. Inexplicably, the first officer sat in the back and let the observer pilot act as the co-pilot. Moreover, the captain told him that he was handing over the controls for takeoff.
The runway is wet, and we have a 20-knot wind, so I want a smooth and steady rotation.
The fuel leak repair had delayed the flight, and it was 3:21 p.m. when Flight 2431 lined up at the head of runway 03. Seconds later, they received clearance for takeoff. The storm was rapidly worsening, with winds so strong that some airport trees had been uprooted, knocking down power and communication lines. Communications were cut off, and the pilots were unaware of this. Meanwhile, a special weather conditions report failed to reach the controller due to the communication network outage. It indicated very low visibility and 33 knot crosswinds that could affect flights taking off or landing in Durango. Aeromexico Flight 2431 began taxiing down the runway with the unlicensed observer pilot at the controls. The control tower couldn't even see the runway due to the storm. The Embraer sped down the runway, nearing rotation speed. They advanced with a headwind until they finally lifted off. The observer pilot gently pulled the controls, and the plane lifted off the ground, instantly raising the landing gear. But the headwind changed abruptly to a strong crosswind, destabilizing the aircraft. They couldn't ascend more than 30 feet, about 9 meters, when the captain took over the Embraer's controls. The wind pushed them down, and the captain fought against the elements. 5 seconds later, the left wing touched the runway. Inevitably, the plane struck the ground hard, losing both engines on impact. The runway ended, and the aircraft slid across the field at high speed. 300 harrowing meters for everyone inside the plane. As soon as the aircraft stopped, the 2 flight attendants began the evacuation as quickly as possible. They managed to get all 98 passengers out in time because, as if destined, the plane burst into flames, completely destroying the aircraft once everyone was outside. There were no fatalities in this terrifying incident, though several were seriously injured, including Captain Galvan. The observer pilot was uninjured. What happened? Was the unlicensed pilot at fault? Immediately after the accident, passengers reported seeing smoke and flames as they rushed to escape the plane. Some passengers said that a door had been torn off and that the fuselage had split in two, allowing them to jump directly through a gap in the side of the plane. The crew was able to open the emergency exits and safely evacuate all occupants within 90 seconds. About 3 or 4 minutes after stopping, and practically after all passengers had been evacuated, the plane exploded and became engulfed in flames. Approximately a month after the accident, Aeromexico announced that the 3 pilots who were in the cockpit that day had been dismissed from the company. It stated that while it did not consider the accident to be the pilot's fault, they had violated company procedures by not adhering to their assigned duties during the flight and allowing the trainee pilot to take control of the aircraft. The union representing the pilots protested the dismissal, saying that the decision was based solely on a preliminary accident report and that a full investigation into the accident was still ongoing. Shortly thereafter, the General Directorate of Civil Aviation of Mexico issued a regulation change prohibiting airlines from allowing inactive pilots and flight attendants to fly in the cockpit of a plane. Aeromexico pilots opposed this change and called for a strike, considering the sudden removal of a travel benefit as a violation of their collective bargaining agreement. On September 5th, just over a month after the accident, José Armando Constantino III, the chief investigator of the DGSC, announced that a final conclusion had not yet been reached, but that the cause of the accident appeared to be a sudden wind shear, a microburst. He stated that the pilots had received no warning of adverse conditions before initiating takeoff, and that neither human nor mechanical failures seemed to be responsible for the accident. The final report was published on February 23, 2019. It concluded that the accident was caused by a runway impact due to a loss of control of the aircraft during the final phase of takeoff as a result of low altitude wind shear, which led to a loss of speed and altitude. The report identified several contributing factors caused by the flight crew. One factor was that the pilot of the plane, who was not a certified instructor, was giving instructions to a student pilot who was flying the plane at the time. This resulted in a loss of situational awareness, and the pilots did not maintain a sterile cockpit free of distractions. Investigators also identified contributing factors related to the air traffic controller. The report stated that the tower controller did not follow the proper procedures established for weather conditions that create the possibility of low altitude wind shear. It blamed the controller for failing to inform the departing flight about the rapid deterioration of visibility and changes in wind speed and direction. The investigation made several recommendations to the airline to prevent similar accidents in the future. It suggested that the airline should make changes to its operational procedures to prevent anyone other than an assigned crew member from taking control of the aircraft during any phase of the flight. It recommended additional training for flight crews on sterile cockpit procedures to ensure that crews can maintain full awareness of the aircraft and external conditions. It also recommended further training on how to recognize potential wind shear situations in storms and how to address these situations during flight.